You guys see it recorded? There it is. Perfect. All right, everyone. Well, thank you for joining us tonight and welcome to Unite4CRT's monthly conversation. I'm really excited about tonight because we get to talk about a topic that I'm not only very passionate about, but also my good buddy Angie Kiger and I get to present. So that's going to be a lot of fun. So I can't wait to do that. One thing I ask is if you guys are joining us, do you mind please throwing your microphones on mute? That way we don't get background noise. And as soon as Angie and I get through our presentation, we definitely want to open it up to the group. So we want to be able to have questions and answers. Angie and I tonight are going to be talking about what the process looks like to get a new wheelchair. And there's a lot of aspects that go into that in the beginning, during, and after. So it's going to be a very thorough presentation that we're going to be doing tonight. And for some of you that aren't familiar, if you're one of our newbies joining us tonight, complex rehab technology, that's what CRT stands for, complex rehab technology. And that is specialized equipment that people with disabilities use on a daily basis. For me, that's my electric wheelchair. That's my customized seating system, things that I need to use on a daily basis to be able to live independently and be able to work and do everything that I need to do in a day. And without my complex rehab technology, I wouldn't be able to work. I wouldn't be able to do those things. So that's why CRT is something that's so essential to our lives. And that's why a lot of us that are on this call, we make it a priority to advocate for CRT. So that's kind of what complex rehab technology is. That's where our name Unite4CRT came from. But we all come together each month to talk about different conversations that relate to people that have disabilities, whether that's people with disabilities themselves, family members, caregivers, clinicians, suppliers, manufacturers, and we all come together and have some pretty great conversations tonight. And again, tonight, I'm really excited about the one we're going to be having with my buddy, Angie Kiger. Angie's a rock star. That's what I got to say about Angie. She's a clinical strategy and education manager for Sunrise Medical in the United States. She is also an assistive technology professional, a seating and a mobility specialist, and a certified therapeutic recreation specialist. Again, overall, I got to give props to my girl, Angie. She's just an overall rock star, and her and I are from the same age frame, so we get to have a lot of fun with our 90s chat and our new kids on the block reminiscing. So we've had a lot of good times about that, but I'm going to go ahead and let's get this presentation started. I'm going to pass it off to Angie. She's the expert in this talk now. I'm just going to be chiming in and joining in with her. You're the expert.
I have to laugh because expert, you realize I've got expert when I've got Michelle Gunn on here watching, who is arguably one of the experts in the world of CRT and evaluations. Cindy Smith from Craig Hospital, Wheezy Walker. You know, we got some quite heavyweights, which I definitely want you guys to chime in, especially Cindy. And there are other therapists. I apologize. Cindy's a personal friend of mine, so I know that she's on here. So Cindy, be sure to jump in if we miss anything, because I think what I love about this, and I'm going to slowly pull up my my screen and share this as we go through it. This presentation, the good news, it's only 8 slides. Jenny and I actually first did this for, and you'll see it looks all professional and whatnot, because Jenny and I did this for the REEF Summit this year. When I was approached about, hey, will you do something for the REEF Summit? I wanted to do something that could really empower folks who utilize wheelchairs and through the evaluation process. Even though I do work for a manufacturer, you'll see all that stuff on here. We're not here to promote any one brand. There are multiple brands that are out there, and I'm always passionate about that. When I'm in the world of education, I think we have great products. I love them. Don't get me wrong, but I think it's important when you do education that you kind of like separate yourself, as opposed to, this is not going to be a sales pitch for Quickie or Jay or any of that kind of stuff. All that stuff, we'll definitely give you resources to follow up on afterwards. But one of the themes that I had been seeing for quite some time, whether it's on the social media pages of Sunrise Medical or the Quickie Wheelchairs social media pages, talking with friends, like talking with Jenny. I'm actually good friends with, you guys may know, there's a couple that's got a pretty cool YouTube channel, Cole Sidner and his wife Charisma. They're personal friends of mine. And so, just recently Cole was going to get a new wheelchair, and he's like, hey, I'm going to go get, I'm looking for a new wheelchair. What should I do? And he's like, I think I want it to be a Quickie. So can you help me? I said, sure, but can you call your therapist first to set up an appointment and talk to your supplier? And he's like, oh, okay, yeah, I can do that. And so they did a really cool experience video on their YouTube channel that actually talks about, I have to look at the title of it, but I think it's somewhere along the lines of Cole has a curve in his back or something like that. And it's all about like the appointment at the outpatient facility. It's actually a friend of mine owns it down in Richmond, Virginia. And then his complex rehab technology provider actually is one of the nationals, New Motion. And his ATP came over and was a part of it. So they did the whole wheelchair eval. It was not an advertisement at all. You'll see that the different pieces that they pick, and good news is the wheelchair was approved. It should be delivered soon. But talking with Cole and kind of, like, hey man, what was the last time you got evaluated for a wheelchair? And he's like, it's been a while. And I said, well, looking at your posture and how you're sitting there, in the nicest way possible, clinicians who focus on CRT and seating and positioning and our providers, we, in the most appropriate way possible, we are judging you because it's not in a negative way, but we're looking to, how's the function going? What does your overall health look like? It's just, we're just those weird wheelchair nerds, you might say. So, we want to encourage, because Cole actually wasn't aware of the process. What had happened with him is he was injured when he was a teenager, and his mother had been his primary caregiver for quite some time. He was living at home with his parents. Well, he's since gotten married, has bought a house, living on their own, that sort of thing. And he's like, yeah, this is absolutely important, but what are the steps involved? So I was like, man, if you can make a video on that, that would be great. And then Jenny and I kind of took off from here. I was like, hey Jenny, do you want to do this session with me for the Reeve Summit? Because I wanted to provide the perspective of the end user also, right? Because I think it's important. And in my world, I refer to Jenny as an end user, or folks who utilize our equipment, or clients. And just to give you guys some fun pictures of Jenny and I left the slide in here. This is Jenny and I have known each other since 2012 when I first started with Sunrise. She actually did a couple presentations with us. We've done advocacy together. We've hung out at various social events for advocacy. We've had dinner together many times. I've been to her house and all that good stuff. And so we've just built a friendship over the years. But Jenny, I would say, you say that I'm a rock star in our world, but I think you definitely are, because of the advocacy that you do and how knowledgeable you are about what your personal needs are. I mean, some of the anecdotes that I've had with Jenny over the years about everything from, okay, you contracted transverse myelitis at 9 months old. So basically you grew up in a wheelchair for all your recollection, and hearing all about what, her awesome parents, which we hear Barb is watching. So hi, Barb. The advocacy that they taught her and educating her is just phenomenal. So Jenny obviously is in Colorado, and I'm actually right outside the Washington, D.C. area. Although I'm from Virginia, real Virginia. I live in Northern Virginia, 2 different states. I swear we need to recognize the DC metro area as a special, special place. That's all I'll say there. So yeah, these are some fun pictures of us. Let's move on. So the objectives, I think, for our meeting this evening, and Jenny, correct me if I'm wrong, are very similar to what we did for the session for the Reeve Summit, right? Like, we want to make sure that you guys have an understanding, whether it be you're a loved one of someone who utilizes a seating mobility or wheelchair, or you're utilizing one yourself. Don't be embarrassed by any questions, because a lot of folks don't know the steps that go into the process. I mentioned Cole and Charisma, and then just recently I was out, let's say about a month ago, I was out in Fresno, and I was working with some folks, and we were doing some various user validation testing or interaction, and letting some folks try products. And that's right, we do use real life wheelchair users, and having them out there. And part of my role in it was to do a little bit of an intake. In the world of therapists, the intake means basically asking question, what's your history? We'll get into more of that. And I had a few folks who could not identify who a seating specialist was in their area, and they lived in that area for 20 plus years. So that was another kind of like a little mini red flag. And we know the process is hard, basically, and you're not alone. If some of what we say is new to you, or some of our folks that have been doing this for years from the professional side, once again, if you have tidbits, chime in. I will warn you, I am terrible at reading the chats. I'll do my best to pop in on that. That's my ADHD in me. I learned to focus on what I need to focus on, and all the other stuff I try to ignore. It's called a compensatory strategy, I've learned. So we're going to also talk about members of that interdisciplinary team. I keep alluding to some other great professionals on the call. I think it's important that we really define those roles and those people. I think sometimes the lines do get blurred, or you might not know why they're there. One of the gentlemen I spoke to out in California, and I think I may have had a conversation with Weezy about this afterwards, but it was a gentleman who'd been using a manual chair for 20 plus years. And, we talked about when he got his most recent chair, and, he mentioned that he had never heard or worked with a therapist, but he'd been getting a chair for numerous years over and over again. And when I explained to him the value of what a trained therapist can actually bring when it comes to seating and position evaluation and recommendation for equipment, and kind of opened his mind up. And, we had the whole discussion. He's like, yeah, I'm not getting any younger. I really need to look at my posture. You're right. Like, this is the reality. So, and then of course, resources. You're not going to retain everything we say. Totally cool. You're not going to offend us to email us, reach out to us afterwards, check out all the resources we have. And if you have any of my professional friends on here or end user friends, definitely chime in with those too.
And one thing I want to say before we move on to the slide is we will open this up for question and answers. So not only what's in the chat, but if you guys have questions, you want to, turn on your camera, open your mic, ask us that way. We are going to definitely leave some time at the end to do that. So even if your questions aren't being answered right away in the chat, keep in mind we will get there. So please have your questions ready, because that's what we want to do when we're done presenting.
Yeah, for sure. And what I'll do is I will actually jump through and look at the questions probably more towards the end. So if something comes to your head, right, because this is totally me, and you don't want to interrupt, but you're like, oh, I want to make sure I don't lose track of this, just type it out and Jenny and I'll answer it later. And that's, I have a feeling, can't say for sure, but she's probably watching the chat too, so she'll chime in if she needs to. If you are, if you don't feel comfortable vocalizing, Annette will be happy to do that. So.
Yep, she's great about doing that for us. So your questions will not be missed.
All right, so let's talk about our team members. When we talk about team members, a few things just as a reminder for that I'm going to be speaking to our end users such as Jenny in this presentation or this discussion, guys. So my therapist friends and my CRT provider friends, those are who I'll be talking to. So if you're like, wait a minute, that's not me, figure I'd go ahead and tell you that. So team member, so focus point of when Jenny went for her most recent evaluation at the wonderful Craig Hospital out there in Colorado. The primary person that was the most important was Jenny. That was, she is the team member. You are a member of that team. If you use the wheelchair, it's not my team says, it is we all say. Like, this should be a discussion. This should not be you have to get this. You should do this. It should be a discussion. And therapists, we will, we definitely have times when we are like adamant that you really need to go down this road. This is what is best. But at the same time, I don't know about you guys, but there have been plenty of things that my doctor has said to me over the years, and I've shook my head at, and you can tell by my accent, I'm Southern. And so my mother raised me to say, yes, ma'am, and no, sir. And I say, yes, sir, you are correct, sir. All right. My dentist, great example. Angie, are you flossing like you should? Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I may have only flossed 2 weeks before I came in here, but whatever. So, we know that at the end of the day, as clinicians, we know that we make solid recommendations and we want the best for you, but we also know the practicality of what's going to happen potentially later on with the end user. Also, family and caregiver. Some of you guys might be like, hey, I'm completely independent living on my own. Jenny, you're an independent woman, as they say in some aspects. You choose to have the folks in your life that assist you, but can you explain a little bit about your family and caregivers and kind of what their role was in your most recent wheelchair selection process?
Absolutely. I mean, the main thing is my family is so used to what I do in my everyday life. So they know the things that are important. They know the things that also, that's something I might miss. So it's very important. And they think about things from a different perspective. Like my mom really thinks about things from a caregiver perspective. She loved the idea of being able to have a seat elevator because then I could match heights of beds when we were doing transfers at different places. If we were out of town or in a different place than, her home, my home, that was something that was really important to her. She knows my needs so very well, so very well. And it's good to get other people's perspective and other people's thoughts, because obviously I know what I need, but having that team, that option, those pieces of advice, family and caregivers know that very well, and that they use that equipment with you on a daily basis as well. If there's positioning that they're worried about, all of those things are very important to bring up.
Absolutely. And we kind of talk about, if you were listening in beforehand, I was talking about my parents. One of these days, my mother's going to learn that she has access to watch some of these videos and is going to disown me or write me out of the will, because I talk about old Sandy Kiger quite a lot. But I encourage my parents, especially as they get older, to go together to doctor's appointments, because there's certain things that you don't necessarily retain if you're overwhelmed by what is happening. Especially for me, if there's a lot coming at me, a lot of decisions I need to make, I'm like, whoa. So it's good to have somebody there that's listening from an objective standpoint. So I encourage you, even if you're like, hey, I'm totally independent. If you have a significant other, if you have a sibling that is with you, a parent, what have you, I definitely encourage that. And I think that most clinical facilities will welcome, one other caregivers. During COVID times, it's a little bit sketchy, but to welcome that in, because that extra kind of pair of eyes is helpful too. Rehab technology supplier or provider. Thanks to the great folks here at NARTS for hosting this. Funny enough, one of the first conversations that Weesey Walker and I had was really differentiating between the rehab technology supplier and the ATP. I think that that's something I want to make sure I touch on a tad bit here, because the assistive technology professional certification is a fantastic certification that a lot of us who are really focused on complex rehab and seating, positioning, or any sort of assistive technology, from communication devices to computer access, all that kind of stuff, we choose to specialize in that. And that's just an additional certification. And I would say, for the rehab technologies suppliers, those guys have specific training and specific backgrounds and things that they focus on. So they come to the table with a whole different mindset. So it's not just the ATP. I often tell people when they, if people who've challenged me on that, I'm like, look, I've got a speech therapist friend who is amazing. She can outposition most people for eating and consuming thin liquids. It is very valuable to have as a part of a key consultant in the wheelchair evaluation process. But because of what her clinical ethics say for speech therapy, she's not qualified to be a part of the of the primary team. Key consultant, yes, but primary team, no. Primary team also, occupational therapist. You'll also see physical therapists that are involved in this process. This is something I always find interesting, is that a lot of times people think, oh, man, I wonder how many hours of credits that OTs and PTs got when they were in school on wheelchairs. And actually, I've actually surveyed a bunch of my friends, they're OTs and PTs, and they're like, hey, most of our stuff is hands-on training. It's a little bit of, we pass on, we're constantly trying to educate folks that are coming up. But the reality is, of having that opportunity to do a 4-hour credit in college isn't necessarily there. So really, OT and PT, OTs and PTs, it both fits within their scope of practice. So they can actually specialize in it, and you may have an OT or a PT working with you, and that's okay. Or you may, if you're in luck, you might have both that you have on your team, which would be fantastic. Of course, the physician, and sometimes nurse practitioners will fall under this realm. I can speak from the facility in which I came from, because a lot has changed since I left there 9 years ago. And the fact that we used to be able to say that physicians were really there to write, to sign off on things for us, because clinicians also know that our opinion goes so far, and so do the rehab technology suppliers, and our letters of medical necessities that your therapist write only goes so far. It's really that physician signature that is what takes it over the edge of validity, I guess, or making it so. Please note I say validity in air quotes. It's that MD that typically will pass it over to get your get stuff paid for. With that said, some physicians are right there sitting with you in clinic. You know, some of the physiatrists I've worked with over the years will attend the seating and mobility clinic. They're there all day long. At HSC, the place where I worked out for 12 years, they now have a nurse practitioner that is in every single clinic, and she's writing up notes. And that way they're just cranking stuff out faster, and they're able to bill for her time, which has helped a lot for billing purposes, for reimbursement. So it really depends. But at the end of the day, these folks are really the primary team members. And quite honestly, if you're in the United States, this is really who your funding sources are looking for when it comes to input. But key consultants, these are folks that I'm all about transparency. You'll hear me talk about that. That's one of the things that Jenny and I have bonded on as friends, is that I'll tell it like it is. I don't mind sharing about all the stuff that happens in my life. I'm totally open about things. And I think it's important, you know, if I'm going to go to a doctor's appointment. So I go to physical therapy. My physical therapist, Beth, jokes with me because when I was going to get acupuncture, I emailed my acupuncturist and my physical therapist to talk together because I have thoracic outlet syndrome. And I'm like, I want to bring you two together. And I encourage folks, when you're getting wheelchairs, bring your speech therapist into it. You know, I alluded to my friend Michelle, who lives down in Atlanta. Think about how important seating and positioning is for swallowing, for breathing, for talking, for accessing stuff in your environment. You know, you can get a lot of really great things. If you are someone who is a loved one, someone with a disability, also thinking about your speech therapist helping with just general understanding. For example, your auditory processing. You know, what are they understanding from that aspect? If you're teaching, learning how to drive a power wheelchair, there's a lot of great information there. An audiologist, this sometimes will really throw people off, especially if you're ultra independent. You're like, the heck's an audiologist going to tell you? Few different things. Surprise, surprise, but hearing and vision, based on various studies I have looked at, are the most common things that people do not disclose to their medical professionals. And what I mean by this is, I mean, how many of you guys, as you've gotten older, have had to change the font in your phone to make it bigger? I still haven't. I make fun of my best friend who has. That's really mean of me because I feel like coming back to me, it's going to hit me one day. But, you know, from the audiologist standpoint too, you think about how you're hearing. I had a kiddo one day that we could not position to save our lives. We were so frustrated with this kid. He was nonverbal. He had cerebral palsy. We knew he understood a ton of things. Well, the reason why he was repositioning himself was because his audiologist told us, you realize he's turning to the right because his left ear is his better ear. Like, oh, so here we are doing all sorts of craziness with the seating system, right? Trying to make him position the best way possible. We're like, why in the world does this dude keep changing his position? Well, couldn't hear. Huh. Funny. Rec therapist, because we are cool. That's the very simple thing. You heard Jenny say I'm a rec therapist. I definitely say that with a grain of salt, but your recreation therapist, you know, one of the things another thing I bond with Jenny on is Jenny's zest and love for life. Jenny would be like, you know, if I knew her when she was younger and you know, when I was coming up in the world of rec therapy, we would have been on every adaptive adventure possible. So Jenny, on a scale of 1 to 10, when you're choosing a wheelchair, how important is it for you to be able to engage in your recreation and leisure preferences?
I would say it's probably a 9 or honestly a 10 because it's just that important to me, because you got to have fun. You got to be able to do the things that you want to be able to do in life. And if you're prevented from being able to go on a hike or do the things you want to do just because you're not choosing the right type of mobility products, that's not a good thing for you. And for me, it's not only about the enjoyment, but it's also, you know, as I work as a sports producer, I'm in so many different areas and football fields, baseball fields, so many different types of terrain. So for fun, absolutely. For professional, absolutely. I would say so very important. I've made so many decisions on, you know, past and current power chairs based on how they drive, because that means so much to me.
Yeah. So, I mean, talking with rec therapists, if you're new to this, or you've got, anybody, I know some of our folks that are watching aren't necessarily new to this, like, oh, I've known this for a while. This is, been in chairs for quite some time. These folks that we're highlighting as key consultants, I'm just going to kind of click through these so we can keep things moving. Funding we'll get to in a second. But these 6 specifically right here on the screen right now, these are folks that can really provide insight that you might not have even thought about. Just ask them. I'm not saying you need to quiz everybody. I'm not telling my therapist out there, oh, you got to talk to every single one of these people, telling your rehab technology suppliers you need to, but these guys can provide some great insight. Of course, everybody's favorite F word when it comes to getting the wheelchair, which, man, Jenny and I can tell you some great stories about this. Funding, and of course, your manufacturer. Key consultant. Notice how I said that. Yes. Did I used to recommend, and when I was in clinic, was I hands-on and really determining what exactly someone needed? Absolutely. My role now as a manufacturer is more of a consultant role. I am biased. As much as I want to say I'm non-brand biased, I wouldn't work for a company that makes and sells equipment that I didn't believe in. And I would hope that any of my peers who work for my competitors say the same thing. So they should be a key consultant for sure, if needed. But your PTs and your OTs and your rehab technology suppliers should take the lead. But if there's specific questions for adaptations and adjustments, your manufacturers can definitely be pulled in. And Jenny can tell you that over the years, she has, for us, I'm thankful to say that one of the reasons we know each other is because she has chosen to go with Quickie a few times. But we definitely, she has no problem reaching out going, hey, I've got a question. Can you help me with this? All that sort of stuff. So the roadmap, Jenny, here we go. It's got about just 16 steps. That's all you need to do in order to be able to get your very own wheelchair. What's a rec therapist and how do you find one, Christina Cortez? We can definitely discuss that. We're awesome people. Depends on the where you live, but yeah, let me know. Send me some more info and I can definitely help you with that. Referral process. This all goes back to your funding source. So Jenny, when you needed to go, when you were deciding, and I know your process is a bit different because you are linked in with the great folks at Craig Hospital, but how did that work when you're like, okay, I need to get a new power wheelchair? How did all that work?
Well, how it went for me was each year I have a yearly reevaluation at Craig Hospital. So I get to meet with OTs, PTs, doctors, nurse practitioners, and we do a whole plan of, what's working for me, what isn't. And one of the things that I wanted to discuss with them was that, hey, it's time for me to get a new power wheelchair. This is what I want to do. So we let the OT know, we let my PT know, and then they reached out to me saying, hey, what are you looking at? What are the types you're wanting to try out? What do you want to look at? And I would highly, highly, highly recommend people, if you know that you're going into an appointment where you can discuss getting a new power, a new manual wheelchair, do your research, have an idea of what you want to look at, because there are so many options out there, and it's really important for you to be able to narrow it down to things that work. So I would always say, if you know you're going, do your research, be prepared. But I'm very blessed that I get to work with Craig Hospital. So I told them that it was time. That's what I wanted to do. The doctor got it rolling, got the letter going for me. We started talking to OTs, PTs, and that got the process rolling.
And if some of you guys are like, shoot, I live a few plane rides away from great places like Craig Hospital, don't worry, because what I recommend folks do is for insurance purposes, a referral basically says, hey, you can go in and discuss with your doctor, and your doctor says you need to be evaluated for a new wheelchair, a new seating system, or what have you. When I worked at HSC, we had 3 states. If some folks had Medicaids as their backup, it was a pediatric hospital that I worked at. So we had the 3 Medicaids, but then also the private insurance. And I'd say all of them required that prior to us even seeing them in clinic was that they had a referral written from their physician that said, yep, they need to go do this. So that's the very first step. So if you're unsure of what that is, talk with your insurance company. It's one big thing I always tell people is don't be afraid to call whoever is your third party provider, get to know them. You want them to be your best friend. Because if they are personally invested in you, my experience has been people are more likely to get things done if they have a personal investment. That's like Jenny's agree.
No, I can say that 100%. I even have a contact person now at my insurance company, and it makes all the difference in the world. So yes, reach out to those people because they're very important.
you're not being a pest. You're being, if you have a care manager, a case manager, that's their job.
That's what they're there
to help you.
They will
Yep.
support you. So find out how you can get one of those and speak to your insurance companies, because it does make a huge difference.
Intake and funding. This is something that from our side, back when I was in clinic, and feel free. I know there's some people who are typing the chat. Yeah, hey, happy to chime in. Please take yourself off of mute. Jenny and I it's going to difficult for us to read these chats coming in and out, but intake and funding, my experience on this is exactly what Jenny said. If you know someone's coming in for, hey, they're coming in for a wheelchair evaluation, or they're coming in to get a new cushion or what have you, there are going to be a series of questions that you're asked. And that's truly to help prepare the team for, do they need to borrow demo equipment? And also having an idea of what's happening with funding. Funding, I hate to say it, but really drives the whole process. Unless you're independently wealthy, you can pay out of pocket for things, which it's awesome. But these are some really great things to find out on the front end, because the last thing you want is to get to all the way to the end and you were like, yeah, I found the perfect solution for me. And then only to realize that for some reason your funding source is not seeing eye to eye with you. And maybe you're like, oh shoot, no, I can't have the one that I want. Well, and the one that I need. Well, you could, but if we would have known on the front end that we need to do some little tweaks and some, looking at it and really building those relationships and all that kind of good stuff, it's easier to know on the front end, all that good stuff. Review process. Okay. I encourage people to do this. This is one of my biggest pet peeves. And I think this is from, if you've ever heard my personal story, I have a cousin who has cerebral palsy, and Susan's 10 years older than me. Nothing used to drive me crazier was when I would go to appointments, because as I got older, especially, I would help out my aunt and, go to different appointments. And is when they wouldn't explain things to what Bonnie and Uncle Ralph needed to do. And it was just like, oh my gosh, like IEP process, all that sort of stuff. Like, ask your therapist to review the process and okay, I'm here today. I'm sure Cindy could tell stories about this. Cindy Smith, if she's still on from Craig Hospital, about sometimes, if the process isn't explained, someone comes into clinic, they try a demo, they look down and, they're like, hey, I'm going to drive this one off the lot today. No, I can't drive it off the lot today. So it's important to talk with your therapist and say, hey, what's the process? What's the realistic timeline? It may differ from insurance company to the different state Medicaids to Medicare. So talk with your supplier and ask your supplier and your clinician, hey, so talk to me about the process. What are we doing today? What can I expect? All that sort of stuff. Observation and discuss current equipment. This is one thing that, kind of a little tongue in cheek earlier about how as therapists and wheelchair folks were sometimes judging you. But at the same time, we are observing you. We want to see what works well and what doesn't work well. I think that, just recently I was watching earlier today, I sometimes catch up on my YouTube stuff. Folks that follow on YouTube, right? And I was watching Squirmy and Grubs, and just recently Shane went to wheelchair clinic at Gillette in Minnesota, and he was talking about the process there. And Shane has gone in his books on the record that he has never had a good wheelchair bow. He hates wheelchair bows. He has a chapter in one of his first books talking about the mean wheelchair lady, because people would always try to tweak and change things that made it so he wasn't functional anymore. So you want to speak up. Maybe there's a reason why Jenny, in my opinion, looks a little bit off. She might be able to say, oh, well, the reason why I have this is because of that. So I'm like, oh, all right. So you don't want to change that unless there's a medical reason or a darn good reason to do it. We might have a discussion about it. At the end of the day, Jenny might see my view, or we might just say, you know what, Jenny, you're right. Let's keep it the way it is.
Yeah. It's important to speak up, when you are questioned, about how is your positioning, or, when I was getting my eval, one of my therapists asked me, it looks like you're really working hard to sit back. Is that the case? And talk about the reasoning as to why you're sitting the way you are, because there might be a good reason and it might be for function. So definitely speak up. Definitely, even though you're being questioned, it's not questioned in a bad way. So definitely sure you guys have those conversations, because you don't want to take away your function either. And obviously that's not what they're trying to do. But if they don't know, then you guys can't have that conversation.
Absolutely. I always talk about the client interview. This is the thing that actually I did a podcast too. If even so, anybody who's on here from the professional side, and I also encourage end users to follow these folks too, would be a Mobility Management Magazine. For us, that's a little bit of your resource secret. That's where a lot of us in the industry learn about new equipment that's out there, new processes that are happening. The editor is a fantastic advocate for CRT named Laura Watanabe. And she does great talks to all the manufacturers, learns new things. And she also has a podcast. And I did a podcast for her. It was kind of funny when she reached out. She's like, hey, I want you to do a podcast on how you do client interviews. And in the email, she's like, because you mentioned something about how you treat it like you're on a first date. I'm like, oh, Lord. I'm like, I said that, but it's true. I do, when I'm teaching, I sometimes black out and forget what I maybe have said. But it's true. It kind of is like it's not a pass or fail. And there's got to be a reason behind everything that your clinicians are asking you. And if you want to know why, like if I'm asked Jenny something and Jenny's like, oh, that's awkward, then Jenny should say, yeah, no problem. Can you help me understand what, why would you like to know that? Okay, cool. Once you understand it. And sometimes, this is why we try to keep the client interviews and everything else kind of in a small area, right? So we're not having these whole, public, because some of the stuff we're asking about can be very intimate and a little bit detailed and might make people freak out. You should hear me when I teach the class on working with adolescents. That's a fun class to teach because people get like weirded out when I talk about anything related to the reproductive system. But I'm like, hey, that's a reality of what teenagers are thinking about. So client interview, be open, be honest. And think about all aspects of your life. I always tell folks, tell me what you feel like on your best day, what you feel like on your worst day, whether it's related to mental health or whether it's related to physical. Physical pain can manifest because of you're having a difficult day or a difficult mental health day. That could also make it so you're like, I just can't get up from my wheelchair. Okay, well, what can we do to help you? Is there anything that we can do to help you with your seating system for that? Everything from, if I ask Jenny, hey, Jenny, what do you like to do on the weekends? It's not because I'm like curious to, like ready to judge her because she goes out sometimes and doesn't tell her mother and has her siblings put her in tubes and going down big snowy hills.
Barb's on.
Yeah. We don't tell Barb that because Barb gets worried about her baby who is in her late 30s now. But here's the thing is that we're not looking to judge Jenny on that. It's just because I want to know, like, Jenny, where do you want to go? Where do you need to be able to navigate in this chair?
One thing I would say too is from the client aspect, don't be afraid to ask questions too. There's nothing that's too little. Like for me, it's so important to know, well, is there going to be a place where I can mount my water bottle? Because I have limited strength, I have limited range of motion. If I can't reach my water bottle based on the setup of my new wheelchair, that really affects my literal everyday life. So think about all those little things you use every single day, because it's so essential, and you got to think about those things.
And Annette, I just saw what you said also. So I was referring to Mobility Management's podcast, but also other great resources. You guys are already hooked in with Unite4CRT. NARTS has some phenomenal resources. And a lot of times people think like the Directions magazine, like, oh, that's for the professionals. Not necessarily, because there's all sorts of really cool case studies that are in there. You can learn about what we don't put anything in there that end users wouldn't apply to them or they shouldn't see, sort of thing, right? Like it's always the more information. That's the cool thing about our industry, I feel like, is that we're very much of an information forward sort of industry. And we're not trying to hide things from the end user, hide things from the manufacturer or from the supplier or whomever. It's like we all want to share that information. Discuss your goals. Goals are probably the thing that, like, for me, when I teach, objectives are what kind of keep me on track, right? So I'm like, okay, I want the participants to walk away out with an understanding of this. When you're doing a wheelchair evaluation, I think therapists and suppliers will say the client's goals are their kind of North Star, if you will, during the eval. My throat is getting dry. This is for me being on calls all day, so apologize for that. So discuss goals. So Jenny, when you sat down, and what's the name of your therapist? She's a friend of mine. I actually know her at Craig. But when you sat down to do your wheelchair eval for your most recent power chair, what were some of the goals that you had in mind? Like,
Well,
name
the
of
main
one.
thing is, I work as a sports producer, so I'm in a lot of different environments. So one main thing for me is I need to have a small compact wheelchair, and I'm a individual, so that works for me. But that's something that's very important because I'm in studios, I'm in different colleges and different control rooms. And if I can't fit in these places, I can't do my job. So that's something that's really important. Also, the type of seating system that I sit in, we need to make sure that that seating system can work in the chair that I choose to use. Because I use an Aspen seating system. It's an Aspen seating orthosis, so it's completely molded to my body, and we need to make sure that that sits or that fits in to the chair that I'm getting. So that was something that we definitely discussed. And then again, like I've mentioned, the drive was so important to me because if I can't access the areas that I need to be able to do, not only for work, but for fun, that's going to make a huge difference for me. So those were some of the top 3 things that I wanted to have those discussions about.
Another drive that you might hear is actually physically being able to drive your vehicle. Jenny drives her own van, so being able to get behind the wheel and continue. And I know that was some of the adaptations that definitely had to be taken into consideration even after your chair was delivered.
Well, and that's also why I needed the compact setup, because my driving equipment is positioned so closely to me. And that's one thing that I would definitely say, if you're an individual that does drive, make sure you put that chair, once you get it, in your van and make sure it works. I mean, we even went out before, did some measurements, but even when we got the chair, we went back out there and there were things that still didn't work. And we had to make those adjustments. So if you drive 100%, definitely something you need to pay attention to.
I saw that a few therapists are on here. So now, because I'm getting kind of tired of listening to myself talk. I want to, any of my therapists that are on here, jump in why? Because I think hands-on evaluation, I think sometimes this is where corners could be cut in order of time. And I've heard this from folks that use chairs. I've said hands-on evaluation. You mean I was supposed to get on the mat? Like they can't just take the measurements while I'm seated in the chair? No. So any therapist want to come off a mute and talk about why the hands-on evaluation from your perspective is so important?
I'll speak a little bit. Yeah, no problem. My name's Jason. I'm an OT here in Michigan. I've worked in private clinics and hospitals and school systems. You have to do not only the chair evaluation, right? The mat evaluation is one of the most important pieces ever, because you can't get your true leg lengths, measurements, torso, because of possible muscle restrictions, joint restrictions, muscle tone, right? All these things start to play a role in terms of how the individual is seated in the chair, right? So you need to know what is the full length that particular individual is able to move in. And when they're on the mat, or what we would call a gravity eliminated plane, now we can get those measurements. We can get those as close to accurate assessments that are possible, right? The hands-on allows the individuals that are doing the assessment to understand a little, because we're not that person, but understand a little bit where the restrictions are and how difficult it will be for that person to transfer in and out, right? How difficult will it be to either graduate to equipment that will make them more independent, or as they get older or develop more restrictions, will they have to have more adaptations made to that chair because of certain restrictions, right? So you'll start to see where those restrictions really impact that individual, right? But I think that, and you have all been touching on this, and Jenny, you've mentioned this a lot too. It's not only important to have the chair measurements, the mat measurements, right? But you got to talk to that particular person, right? You need to know what they want. It doesn't matter a whole heck of a lot what I want as a therapist, right? Because that chair is now an extension of their body, right? And many people don't realize that. So, very key pieces to really understand what they want, what the therapist involved want, what the doctor wants, what the orthotic or prosthetists that are working with the individual want, right? And you mentioned it earlier, speech is a great person to have in place, because what if that person is not able to communicate well, right? We want to know what that person has to say. So the on-hands, mat evaluation, chair evaluation, it all has to take place.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jason. Yeah, for sure. And I think that sometimes is something that even folks who work within our company that utilize wheelchairs, I will harass them quite honestly when they're like, oh, it's time for me to order a new one. I'm just going to spec out a new ultralight wheelchair. And I'm like, when was the last time somebody put their hands on you and saw what was happening? Because your injury happened 43 years ago. And we need to see what's happening because, you know, there's some changes that are happening in your body. And this is a discussion I had recently with a professional in the industry, is that sometimes we can kind of forget that not only do people with a disability age and have things that are happening related to the disability, but also, and Jenny, I'm sure that you're aware of this, you know, I'm guessing even though you have a disability, you still get gray hair probably coming. You're probably, you know, potentially have some vision, issues. So think about all this stuff, is that all of the basic aging things and changing that happens too.
When it does that, and just real quick on the hands evaluation, I just want to say, especially for people that might be new to this process, I know it's hard to let people really kind of get in there and fill around on the body and do those things, you know, but it's so important. It's so important. So I know sometimes it could possibly be uncomfortable if it's something new to you, but the more they know your body, they can really recommend so much more for you. So it's something to be open with.
And with every other, medical professional out there, without getting too deep into this, I highly recommend, if you feel uncomfortable, if someone comes to your home, you know, alone, and they want to do this, you're like, hey, I don't want somebody touching me like that. That's okay. Say that to the CRT supplier that's there. Say, hey, I would like a team person to be there. I mean, anybody can tell you, especially women, you know, obviously I go to my doctor's appointments, that when my doctor, who's a male, does certain things, he brings in a nurse. Like, it's like, you know, another person, just to kind of help everybody feel comfortable in that situation. So I cannot imagine, I'm not a big touchy-feely person, so I cannot imagine how difficult that is. And is, you know, it could feel like an invasion. So we get that. And I can tell you that your clinicians get that and will respect you. Please speak up on that.
Absolutely.
Angie, one more. Oh, I'm sorry, Jenny. Go ahead, please.
No, you're great. Go ahead, Jason.
What I was gonna say was, you know, and also relation to that too, like many individuals, especially if they have a spinal cord injury, right,
Mhm.
and they don't have sensation in their body,
Yep.
they're gonna have many sensory challenges. So
Mhm.
not being able to pick up on something that's uncomfortable to them, whether it be physical, emotional, whatever it may
Mhm.
be, that's gonna put them even more on edge, right?
Yep.
So I think you hit it also on the head there, Angie. If you're not comfortable, have someone else there to be with you, because it's that important.
Yeah, absolutely. So feature matching and equipment trials, I'm trying to be cognizant of the time, because I know, you know, Jenny and I were talking about, we're trying to keep it to an hour, but there's so many little things that go into this. So let's kind of touch on feature matching equipment trials and equipment recommendations. What I mean by feature matching is, a lot of times, you know, we mentioned, hey, client interview, discuss goals. How my brain works is, I'm sitting there thinking, okay, Jenny wants to do this. I need a chair that does 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I may look over at somebody like a Michelle Gunn or a Jerry Dickerson, who's in there with me, and, you know, as the partner, you know, from the supplier standpoint, and go, hey, man, I really need a product that does these. It needs to have all these features. And then so we're going to sit there and have a discussion about what products out there meet that. You heard Jenny say one of the things that she has to have is the custom molded seating. So even if she falls in love with a certain power wheelchair base, that is Jenny will tell you that will nix her if it cannot take a third party back, such as Ride Design's custom molded seating. Jenny's not going to consider it. So you have to really look at, you know, what are the features and what can they do. And, you know, it's not going to, like, if clinicians don't know the answer, or the supplier doesn't know the answer, you know, give them a hot minute to contact the manufacturer. That's why the manufacturers are out there. It's why all manufacturers have sales reps. You know, reach out to them. They're happy to help you. Equipment recommendations. You know, this is when we get to the point where it's like, okay, we're towards the end. We've done an equipment trial. One of the things that Jenny was saying is, when she first was doing her power wheelchair evaluation last year at Craig, one of the things that she told, give them a heads up on the front end. And the reason why you do that is so there's not this fleet of demos that fits everybody that, you know, is out there. They have to sometimes, you know, if Jenny's like, hey, this is what's important to me, then her therapists are going to contact, you know, the supplier and talk with them, like, hey, can we get demos of these top 3? This is what I think, based on what Jenny's saying, her needs are going to work. And then get the demos in there to let her do the equipment trials. And, you know, Jenny loves to drive power wheelchairs. Tell me all about how she took, you know, different brands, and she saw pros and cons of different brands, and said, you know, I need to find which brand works for me. And Jenny, I'm sure you have friends that probably use all of the top 4 or 5 different brands that are out there.
Oh, absolutely. And you always got to be open to everything, because there might be a new product that you're not aware of. So again, do your research and see what's available. And also one thing to keep in mind too is, another important reason why you want to give your therapist a heads up. Like me, I'm a very petite individual, and it's very hard to get a demo to be my size. And you got to keep that in mind. So, when you try this chair, it might not fit you properly, but that's okay. But focus on the things that are going to matter the most. Focus on that drive. Focus on those type of things you're demoing it for, because even though the demo isn't right for you right now, it can be customized to get there. So, but if you give your therapist a heads up, they can get better equipment that hopefully fit your needs. And even like, I'm looking at possibly getting a new manual wheelchair soon. And my therapist, I've been communicating with her, and she said, we'll do our best to get a smaller one for you, Jenny, but we might not be able to, but we'll do our best. So that heads up really helps them prepare.
Yep. As we're continuing along the roadmap, you'll see that once again, review goals and next steps come up. Hey, well, we talked about goals on the other column there. Well, the reason why we're talking about goals again is because we're at the point now where we've already started talking about equipment recommendations. So you need to circle back with your therapist during that evaluation process and, really be like, okay, are all my goals, are all my goals being met? Here's a little secret. All of your goals might not be being met. How have you prioritized those? Are the ones that are the most important to you, the ones that you need and you discuss? Because unfortunately, I would love to say that there's a perfect thing for a perfect match for everything, but even you think about your basic consumer products. I mean, how many times have you bought a TV, bought a computer, and been like, shoot, I wish it had, but it had almost everything I wanted, so I went with that. Sometimes there's a need for compromise. After that, there's going to be submission for funding, and this is where you are still involved, end users. This is something I always keep that in mind. And Jenny, my favorite thing was Jenny being an advocate. And she had invited me into the process early on, and signed all the HIPAA agreements and stuff with Craig, because she and I have, being a personal friend of hers and someone in the industry, she's like, hey, I want you to be able to talk with my therapist there openly. And so she would email for different updates. And so she was emailing the therapist, and we found out that Jenny's first line of defense, or her first funding option, denied her something. Jenny's email was hysterical because she got the letter. She's like, I got this letter today. Sent us a PDF of it, and was ready to fight. I mean, she had her weapons out, and we're like, hey, Jenny, let's wait to see what your backup insurance says first before we start trying to attack the other ones. And Jenny's like, okay, well, I'm ready. You tell me I'm ready. And I love that about Jenny, because she's willing to fight. And she stays on top of it. I mean, she was like sending copies, because sometimes your suppliers don't always get, whether things get lost in the mail, whether, odds are you might see things before other folks do. So Jenny would it doesn't matter if you're like, oh, they probably already got this. We'll delete the email if we've already got the PDF of it. But regardless, send more information as your insurance company is contacting you. That's key, because waiting for the approval process could take a while. There could be a need for an appeal. Just right now, there's a good friend of mine who's actually, she's a rec therapist. Funny enough, her son, Bauer, is due for a new chair, and they're denying his equipment. And she's like, we're on our third appeal. She's like, my husband is an attorney, and we're on our third appeal, and we're trying to work through this. And it's crazy to think about, but the reality is they're having to walk through all these appeals. I wish it was easier. I'm hoping, within my lifetime that will be an easier process, but stay on top of everything. Once there has been approval, then that's when equipment is going to be ordered, depending on that. This could differ between your funding sources and between which supplier that you work with. But just as a heads up, that just because you got your order, your approval letter saying, yes, it was approved, doesn't mean that the next day you could expect your individual from your rehab technology provider to call you and say, hey, Jenny, ready to deliver. Because then what has to happen is it actually has to be manufactured and then sent to the supplier. They have to set it up. In Jenny's case, she had her power wheelchair coming from one source and her seating system coming from another. So then they had to marry everything together. So it could take longer than the next day, but reach out to your suppliers too. They're the ones that they can help you find that information. Most of the folks have customer service representatives that can help. Is there a question? Okay, I just want to make sure we were good to go, but no question. Last couple steps to hit would be, I know it's 8 o'clock now, but delivery and fitting and follow-up. and reviewing those goals again. Because I know, as we've talked about, custom, complex rehab, it's built for that individual. You could have had a minor change, maybe you lost weight, maybe you gained weight, maybe you're not functioning exactly the way you were, depending on how long the funding process takes. So having a delivery and fitting appointment is key, and expect that appointment to last a while. And that's okay. You wanted them to get it right. The last thing you want is to be like, we're about to run out to the mall, or I've got an appointment. So sure, Jerry, we can schedule you in for we got 30 minutes. Can you knock it out? Depending on the chair, it could be 30, it could be 15 minutes. Or it could be a few hours. You make sure that you are dedicating that time and understand the value in that. And Jenny, for your chair, you went back, correct me if I'm wrong, you went back to Craig, right? Okay.
I did. I actually went to a couple of follow-up appointments because there were a couple of things that we were still tweaking. So I would 100% say, be patient. And if something isn't what you expected it to be, let them know that, because these are professionals. They might be able to, like, I didn't like the positioning of my armrests. They flipped the pads on my armrests and it made all the difference in the world. Like, there's all these little tweaks that can be made that I would have, I kind of thought about it because I've been around it long enough, but there's so many things that can be done. So be patient and speak up, because you're the one that's ultimately using that equipment. And if it doesn't work for you, you're the one that's not going to be able to do what you need to do. So be patient, speak up. It's a process. It's such a process, but it is worth it, especially if you get what you need out of it.
Absolutely. So, and we will send you these resources. I'll talk to people asking different resources. And hello, NART's team. I did not make any edits to this prior to this presentation. It came straight from the one Jenny and I did for Reeve Foundation. So look, there you are, Wheezy and Annette right there highlighted. NART's right there on there. So definitely a good resource for you. All of your manufacturers, great resources. It seems like going into the weeds, but if you have the time, go check out some of the order forms, get to understand them a bit more. Remember that your professionals are the ones who are really going to lead you to what you need. And prime example, after Jenny's chair was delivered. Jenny and I were emailing about preparing for the Reeve Summit. Okay. And so anytime when manufacturers nowadays, we launch something, one of our big marketing tactics is at the end of our email signatures, we've got like a picture of whatever the new product is that's launched, right? And so Jenny sees a new smaller base wheelchair that was being advertised from us. It's a smaller footprint. And so Jenny automatically sends me a text, hey, did I miss out? Like, basically, like, did you not tell me something was launching that could have been better for me? What are you doing? And so I was like, so Jenny, what that wheelchair does not offer the same suspension that you have. And from what I know about you is the suspension that you want. Jenny wants to go everywhere. So she wants the highest level suspension available, right? So I'm like, that smaller base is a great option for some folks, but for you, I'd lean you in this direction. Jenny's like, okay, fair enough. Okay. So definitely, like, if you see something that looks nice, talk to your professionals and say, hey, I saw this, and be open to, odds are, the professionals have had their hands on that equipment and are more familiar with it. So questions, all that kind of good stuff. I don't know. I know we don't have a ton of folks still that are able to still hang out with us. We've got about 14 or so people, but definitely open up your mics, and Annette, we can make a PDF of this available, or do whatever you think is easiest.
Yep, that sounds good. We'll email everybody. And if you want to hang on, guys, we don't mind. If you have some questions, go ahead and ask away.
Yeah, let's do it, guys. This was the best part of the presentation. So we want to hear from you. So don't be shy. Let us know.
Okay, I have a question.
I'm Allie.
I was captured by a 3.5-year-old, so what can I say? So I got here late. I don't know if this got addressed or not, but I'm coming up on 5 years in this Permobile that I have, which has been an amazing chair. When I bought this, or when this was spec'd for me, there were 2 features that weren't covered by Medicare, right? So I had to come out of pocket for them. The lift was one, and I don't know if it was the tilt, but it was another one of the features. So now I understand that those 2 features are covered, and also the standing aspect is covered. So what I have found in I don't know, what is this, 26 years of doing this, that I have actually been the one that's been feeding my people responsible for speccing this stuff. I have been feeding in that information. So what information do I need to prompt my physician
Mhm.
to express that will get me the standing aspect of the chair?
That is a phenomenal question. I'm going to, Cindy, do you want to field that one? I'm happy to field it, but I'm curious. I'd love to hear a supplier who's working out there, and also hear from a clinician.
I'd love to hear from Weesey first, because my understanding, this is Cindy, my understanding is at this point in time that we do not yet have Medicare coverage for standing wheelchairs.
So we see what you got.
Yeah, let's see, a problem. Can you,
Hold on. We
Can you-
hear you.
oh,
Yep.
okay, I'm sorry. I was trying to talk earlier. Yes, the Item Coalition, along with NCARD and Clinician Task Force, is trying to get a change in the policy coverage.
Right.
And it's been delayed because there wasn't a CMS person in place. And now that person has been approved, and they hope to hear something soon.
Mhm.
But to
I'm
Molly's question, you brought up a great point, and aren't you entitled to have a case manager work with you on your insurance plan? You request that?
Probably.
Mhm.
I just never have, right? And I've always gotten what I have needed for myself, but because I'm a quad that stands,
Mhm.
and the standing is, a vital aspect of my well-being.
Mhm.
It seems logical to me, right?
Absolutely.
I'd be able to include this,
Mhm.
and ideally at 20% instead of 100%. But that's just, hey,
Yeah.
yeah.
There are a couple of different things, and obviously I would love to say, and I'm relatively familiar with the three I know relatively familiar with Medicare, obviously, but then also the Medicaids in my specific area. But then you've got all the outliers that happen from if you have private insurance too. So it really is a single option. But I remember the folks that were the most successful for me were the families, because I worked with primarily pediatrics, but also did some consultations with adults, were the ones who requested a case manager. Exactly as he was talking and saying, "Hey, can you help me?" And we used to invite the case managers to the wheelchair appointments. Like, "Hey, come on, join us. Let's make a big party of it." Because once they get to know who Molly is and see Molly's face and go, "Oh yeah, I remember when she was in clinic, her therapist was letting her try standing, and she could do this, and here were the benefits," and that sort of stuff. Some case managers might look at you like you're crazy, or they might be based in a whole different state. But that would be helpful. I would say, without knowing where specifically, like where you would go to clinic, or who you would utilize, because there are a lot of therapists out there now that the old model, I would say, of the big clinics is actually, it's still there, but you're finding more and more folks who do this in a home care setting, who do this because in a long-term care setting, there's kind of various other ones. So I would say that at your big facilities, like Cindy and I probably know a lot about the legislation because we're tied into it, right? But folks who only do this on a part-time basis might not have the mental capacity, bandwidth to remember all of the stuff that has passed. For your clinicians, they should be looking at and advocating for you based on medical need. And so that would be a big thing. And they, your therapy, your PT, especially if you're doing some standing, should be like, "Oh, okay, yeah, for sure. This is what's medically necessary."
Yeah.
And it's about functional necessity also.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, the
Can't
lift,
forget that, right?
Mm-hmm.
yeah, the lift on my on this power chair has been a huge asset.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really glad I paid for it because it really has altered my how I use the world. It's quite nice. But again, because I stand and I have ambulatory capacity with balance support, I need to keep that moving. And so standing would be ideal.
Yeah, I mean, until this gets passed, I would say the first one would be Medicare, but until this gets passed and is kind of on its merry way, be prepared. You're still gonna have to fight for it. I mean, which I'm sure you seem very fiery, Molly. I'm not worried about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Weezy, you said that there's some kind of in-process thing that's happening.
Yep.
Do you have a sense of timing?
I'm on that committee with an in-cart, Weezy. I can actually, I just got one of the most recent versions of it. But yeah, so how that's going, Molly, is we actually have a group of folks that are working and literally writing out what we are proposing the legislation to be changed as, and we have not yet submitted it because we're trying to get a code and make it so it is actually going to be paid for. Because a lot of things will exist with the code, but then there could be zero price. Like, oh yeah, it's coded, but it's like, but then back when Weezy was in the field, it's like, well, yeah, sure, but we don't reimburse for anything. And so then a provider can't provide it because it might be a code that exists, but if there's no agreement from Medicare to say, hey, we're gonna pay for it, that's a whole different ballgame too. Is that right, Weezy? Would you say?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
As Rita Stanley says, the three legs of the stool, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So it might, since the chair that I'm in, yes, I have access because the 5-year kind of thing, but the chair is being just fine, right? Never broken down. I take really good care of it. So I don't necessarily need to go into the process before this thing became in place, before standards were something that they would consider. So it would seem to me reasonable for me to just chill for a little bit and see where that process is.
Yeah.
Right.
I would agree. Yeah.
Yeah. Because basically it's a $10,000 difference, really.
Oh, yeah.
You know.
For sure, because and I mean the good news is all the manufacturers now are working together on this. The call that I mentioned with Weezy is that we do this with Incarnate. There are representatives from Invacare, from Sunrise, from Permobil. So it's a showing a united front, which is nice because all of us or most of us now have a standing frame option available. So it's not like it's something that's completely like foreign when they're seeing this as being submitted as an ask. I will say that, pay very close attention for like change of function. Back when I was in clinic, now I'm 9 years out, but change of function was always a key thing to kind of help because some people would come to us and say, hey, it's been 5 years. And if I can think of this one, it was a child, but the grandmother took care of the little guy. And the chair looked like it was literally just rolled off the manufacturing line. And it was meeting all of his needs. And she said, but I was told I could come every 5 years to get a brand new chair for him. And because we couldn't document necessarily change him, I mean, it fit him like just perfect. There was no change. It was hard. We didn't, we had to be honest with her and say, hey, this is meeting his needs, his functional needs, his medical needs. And we'd love for you to have a newer model, but Cindy, what am I missing there, Cindy? I think, or,
no, I would agree with that totally. Is that it's, even though they say 5 years, 5 years is the minimum amount of time, it doesn't mean that you get a new one in 5 years. It still has to be medically necessary, and they're getting stricter and stricter on what that medical necessity is.
Okay.
So we just had a denial from Medicare not very long ago because they said we didn't have a repair order quote in there that proved that the chair needed to be replaced, even though the chair was almost 8 years old. And that was Medicare.
Yeah.
So they're getting stricter.
So yeah, I always say, and Jason, I know you're in a different part of the country than everybody else, but I would often encourage end users to really focus on and think about where you're at in terms of like, what are you noticing that's different? How is that chair and document that. So like if when you're to go to clinic to say, hey, these are my specific issues. I mean, for someone who came out of pediatrics primarily, growth, well, that was an easy button for us. But for folks who are fully grown, that easy button isn't quite, there. Whether it's respiratory, whether you're, obviously pressure injury is one that's one that's very common too. But tightness, good gracious, decreased range of motion, all that sort of stuff. And Jason, I know I called on you and then I started talking. I apologize. Anything else you want to put in there?
Really, for me, so I'm not a chair specialist. I'm beginning to dip my feet and my hands into it. I've been taking a lot of webinars, and I have a friend of mine who's really who's a seating specialist. But what I've learned so far too is that there are, of course, many laws that govern, of course, Medicare and everything that influence how an individual gets a chair. But within that, when you have your letters of medical necessity that are written, state those laws, state why it's a safety issue, why it's a health concern issue, how is it going to make that person more independent, more functional, right? And that'll be more successful in getting you the coverage that you need so that you can have your chair funded, right? And so I've written a couple letters myself and have cited the law and have been successful with those letters. But like you mentioned earlier, you have to fight for it.
Yeah. And one of the things, I know, Christina, we want to get to your question too, but Molly, some of the things I think about is, this is where I was talking about, is don't be afraid to share information. One of the biggest things that Rita Stanley, who is well known in our industry, for just, to me, hands down the best as far as like funding and understanding government that I've ever encountered, is that she'll always tell me, she's like, therapists oftentimes, and this is also another funding specialist, Claudia Mordigui, both of them used to tell me that therapists by nature can be cheerleaders. And so we're all like, woo, this person took 50 steps or they did this today, but really describe, the feeling, like paint that picture of what the person truly looks like. Because what I might say, from working in pediatrics, that a client accomplished during a therapy session to a loved one, that I really am keeping it in layman's terms versus, they may have walked 50 steps. Did they stumble? Did they fall? Really kind of get into that nitty gritty of it. And then also from the end user standpoint, describe, tell them, be like, when I do this, I used to have no pain. Now on a scale of 1 to 10, it's a shooting pain and an 8. And that, that sort of being able to quantify stuff and describe, that's going to be, that will also be helpful. And most therapists, from my standpoint, writing elements is not fun. The more content and the more information we have from you, the better. If you know the laws or a research study you come across, like, hey, you might want to throw this in there. Bring it. Like, help me help you, sort of thing, without quoting us.
Past and present level of function is really key.
Yep. All right. So Christina, you have been quietly, and Molly, if we didn't answer that, let us know.
It's good. Yeah.
Cool. Very good.
Yeah.
Christina, what do you have for us?
Hi all. Thank you for this session. I have never been in one of these sessions. It is really helpful. As a long-term user of stuck on even though it's rain, and you're like, oh, I want to be by the swings just because I want to see them swing around, just because I want to see them do this stuff. And I found that this chair is good enough for surviving a pandemic, but it's not good enough for the future context of me perhaps going to university for a graduate study and living through the university. I live in Boston, and as you know, the universities, the locations are not always 100% accessible, if not at all. So besides the adaptations we had to go through with the ramps, with the elevators, with all that stuff, the chair, I fear, is not going to hold up to the amount of pressure I'm going to put on it during classes. So my context my environment will completely change eventually within this year or next. So what can I do in this scenario where the chair is good enough for now, but it's not going to hold up for later? The 5-year rule has me completely stuck because my medical condition CP is stable. Is stable. There's no medical changes whatsoever, but my context of usage of the wheelchair has changed. So I need more features, I need more stuff, I need more things on the wheelchair that can be tough enough to change. I think I would even have to change models and drive configurations entirely because of different contexts, if you know what I mean. So what can be done in that case when we need to change context of usage, not necessarily needs of usage?
So definitely a tricky question. And I'll tell you right, because it goes back to the F word, right? Funding. I'll give you kind of, and I know you mentioned the base, and no matter whose brand it is, please don't say the brand name of it, because we don't want, like, if you're worried about quality, that's not something we want to get into. But just a couple.
I meant no offense.
No, I know. I can't see down, so I have no idea whose it is, quite honestly. But one thing just to bear in mind, there are a few. My gut tells me I would set up, like, if you went to a specific wheelchair clinic, is I would reach back out to that therapist and say, hey, I'm headed off. But at the same time, this is what we call in the business world, of course, is parallel path it, right? So also reach out to your wheelchair supplier that you talk to, right? Because that person should be your partner in this process, whether it's, one of the nationals or whoever it is. And I know some of my friends who work with, have worked with specific ATPs, especially those who have CP for years. That's like when that's been their wheelchair guy or gal. So, reach out to them and be forthcoming and say, now it'd be like, hey, I'd love to get on a video conference and just kind of talk with you about, these are my concerns. If there are quality concerns within the seating system or aspects of that in the chair, then that's something that your supplier should be able to work with your manufacturer to address, and any sort of repairs that way. In order to get additional features, that will probably be a feat and a fight, because that's the hardest thing. And I would say what I hear back from therapists is the scariest things is that we have to act like we have a crystal ball. And so do you, right? To be like, okay, where is Christina going to be in 5 years, 6 years, 7 years? It's a lot of pressure that goes on all parties, right? To be like, shoot, I don't know. Oh, I'm going to be tomorrow sometimes. So I'm hoping the team that you worked with, you feel comfortable enough to reach out to. That would be my first line of thought. Anybody else, feel free to jump in.
Of course. And just to make things a little bit more clear, the fact is that I just moved to Massachusetts, a completely different state from where I was. I'm happy where I am.
Okay.
The system's completely different. I've just begun to get my things in order, and everything's fine. On top of this, I'm ordering a second wheelchair that I'm hoping will go through, and we'll see. But I don't want to top 2 wheelchair orders at the same time, for example.
The beautiful thing about the Unite4CRT is a couple of things. If you just relocated to the, to any sort of area, one is you're looking for a CRT provider or supplier. So say it's not a national company, or say you just want to change. Say you're like, you know what, I moved here, I want a fresh start. My insurance company works with ABC Medical, XYZ Medical, whatever. I'm going to reach out to these people. Is you can actually, NARTS has folks that are members and that are certified that I can actually recommend, say, hey, someone who is a NARTS member is in this area, narts.org. I see that coming up right there. Thank you, Annette. And you can go there and say, who's a registrant. I may do this. I may not do them the justice. So Annette, jump off of mute, because I saw we had to drop off if I messed this up. But for me, when I'm looking at a wheelchair rehab technology supplier, having that ATP is great and sometimes required. But also, if they're a NARTS registrant, that means that they're taking their dedication to their profession to an even higher level. they are required to do additional education. They've got this internal network among other professionals. So, you know, I can't tell you all of my friends in the industry if every single one that I work with are NARTS registrants. I would hope that they are. But if someone who's off the street looking for somebody, I would definitely encourage check out NARTS. And then within this group, if you're looking for ideas of therapists, let us know. I mean, we know therapists all over the country. Jenny, I saw you just popped off mute. What you got?
Well, I just want to say, you know, reach out to the group in general, because I might have suggestions and other might have suggestions on, oh yeah, I know this person works over here. This is a very good networking group. So definitely ask those questions, because we can definitely try to help in every way we can. We've done it in the past with some other situations. So I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you spoke up. I'm glad you're saying something, because, you know, NARTS is a wonderful, wonderful resource. Go that route for sure. But if you want to ask an end user that's in a similar situation, this is another great resource for Unite4CRT on what we can do.
Thank you so much, all of you, and thank you so much for addressing a little case.
Yeah.
So
It takes a village. I wouldn't know nearly as much as I know unless I would have all these great people. That's why I was so thrilled to go from, you know, working at a hospital to being able to like network with all these folks throughout the country. So I know it's getting late. We're having people kind of drop off. We've been on since 8:27. So Annette or Jenny, do you want to wrap us up?
Sure. Yeah, no. And if there's any other questions, like on that resource page that we put up, reach out. We can definitely answer some questions offline. That's not a problem. I know Annette's going to share a lot of that information with the group. So please don't be afraid to reach out. Angie or I will definitely help out. And if we don't know your answer, we will reach out to our resources and we'll figure it out for you. So thank you guys so very much. There's just a couple of really quick announcements that I wanted to share with everybody before we do pop off. I'm going to share my screen real quick. A fellow advocate and a friend of mine, Jen Wolf, is putting together a really cool event coming up on June 22nd. And I'm going to read what she sent me because I want to get all the information out there. But next week is the 22nd anniversary of the Olmsted Supreme Court decision. While progress has been made, there's still a long way to go toward fully investing in home and community-based services and independent living. A unique way of bringing attention to the issues our community is dealing with that could potentially assist in getting legislation passed is collectively filing Olmsted complaints. On June 22nd, we will be sharing space, learning about the Olmsted decision, what issues should be filed as complaints, and how to file a complaint. This would be something that you guys really might want to join just to get more educated on what the Olmsted Act is and what you could be doing to make a difference. It's all about voices and it's all about coming together. So we will have a Zoom link coming out shortly that we can share with you guys as well. So we'll put that out to make available, but that's something that we definitely wanted to share with you guys and see if that's something you wanted to participate in, because it's something that's also very important to our community. Last thing I wanted to say is our next Unite4CRT meeting is coming up on Tuesday, July 20th, and it's going to be called Make Your Voice Heard, Advocating for Yourself and Others. And this is going to be a really great session about learning more about the specifics of complex rehab technology, what it truly is to each individual, how you can advocate for it, and how we can all come together to face these issues or take on these issues that we're facing head on, so that we can all come together and fight for what we need. So our July 20th meeting will be really, really important. It'll get a lot of information out. McKay Lee with NCART and Don Clayback, they'll be joining us. They will be our guest speakers, and NCART is the National Coalition for Assistive and Rehab Technology. So they will get a lot of good information out for you guys. So if you're new to CRT and what the equipment is and how to fight for it, this would be the meeting to join on. So I know some of these faces that are here, a lot of you guys are already familiar with CRT, but pass on that information, please, because it would be good to get more, more voices, more people together. So I personally want to thank Angie. It's been a really good night. I think we got some good information out there, and thank you everyone for joining, and thank you everyone that's still been hanging on. And I know we went a little bit longer, but it was a lot of good information. So please reach out if you still have questions, and hopefully we'll see you guys on July 20th.
Cool. Thanks a lot, guys. Have a good night.
Thank you, guys.
Bye, everybody. Thanks.
Yeah,
night.
thank you for putting it all together as usual.
Absolutely.
It was
Yeah.
a great night. Thanks so
Yeah.
much, y'all. Hope to see you in July. Bye.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye,
Bye.
Molly. Bye, Jason. Glad you joined us, Jason. It was great.
Yes, thank you. I got a quick question. So I feel bad saying this. I don't